The armored black sedan music glided silently up the long driveway, arriving hours earlier than anyone expected. Do-hwan music cut the engine and sat in the stillness of the night, staring up at the imposing facade music of his luxury estate. Something felt wrong. The chandeliers were blazing, casting a golden glow that spilled onto the marble steps. Too bright, too inviting for a quiet evening when his wife was supposed to be out of the city. He stepped out, his tailored overcoat settling around his shoulders like armor. And that's when he heard it through the slightly ajar double doors of the master suite. Seoyeon's voice, not in conversation, but in pleasure, followed by the low, familiar laugh of a man he called brother. Do-hwan's eyes widened in shock, then hardened into ice. His hand instinctively flew to the holster beneath his coat, but before he could cross the threshold, a slender hand grabbed his wrist from the shadows of the hallway. "Stay silent," a voice whispered with desperate urgency. It was Vanessa, the young black maid he barely noticed most days. Her eyes were wide with terror, but her grip was iron-strong. She pulled him back into the dim alcove, raising a single finger to her lips in a sharp shhh gesture. And in that moment, Do-hwan, the ruthless head of Seoul's most powerful syndicate, did something unthinkable. He froze. He obeyed. What he was about to learn would shatter his empire to pieces. But from those pieces, a new legacy would be built. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the channel where high-stakes drama meets unforgettable romance. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. Vanessa's grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into the heavy wool of his coat as she hauled him backward, away from the sliver of golden light spilling from the master suite. Do-hwan stumbled, his mind still reeling from the sounds of Seoyeon's betrayal, but his body moved on instinct, following the only person in the house who wasn't currently stabbing him in the back. She didn't stop until they reached the narrow service corridor behind the kitchen, pushing him into the small, sterile laundry room and locking the door with a trembling hand. The silence here was heavy, smelling of bleach and starch, a stark contrast to the expensive perfume lingering in the main hall. Do-hwan slammed his back against the dryer, his chest heaving. The adrenaline that had surged for a fight now crashed into a cold, nausea-inducing shock. His hand was still on his holster, knuckles white. "Move," he growled, his voice a jagged shard of ice. "I'm going to put a bullet in both of them." "No." Vanessa stepped in front of the door, her small frame blocking his path. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly, eyes wide with terror, but she didn't budge. "You can't. That's exactly what they want. They want to humiliate me." Do-hwan sneered, stepping closer, towering over her. "They want to sleep in my bed? They'll die in it." "They don't just want your bed, Do-hwan. They want your life." The words rushed out of her, breathless and desperate. "It's not just an affair. I heard them. Yesterday in the library, and again just now." Do-hwan froze, the rage momentarily suspended by confusion. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa took a shaky breath, smoothing her apron as if to steady her hands. "It's a setup. If you storm in there now, Junho kills you in self-defense. But if you don't, they have a plan for the Lunar New Year gala." She looked up, locking eyes with the most dangerous man in Seoul. "They called it an accident. Poison. Something that looks like a heart attack. They've already paid off the coroner." The silence stretched, suffocating. Do-hwan stared at her, waiting for the lie, for the angle. But all he saw in the maid's dark eyes was raw, unvarnished fear, and a terrifying amount of truth. His hand slowly dropped from his gun. The woman who ironed his shirts had just handed him his life. "Tell me everything," he whispered. Do-hwan leaned back against the vibrating dryer, the hum of the machine masking the pounding in his ears. The small room felt suffocatingly small, a stark white box that smelled of lemon detergent and fear. He watched Vanessa, who was wringing her hands in her apron, her eyes darting to the locked door as if she expected it to burst open any second. "Speak," he commanded, his voice low but laced with a dangerous edge. "And do not leave out a single detail." Vanessa took a shaky breath. "It wasn't just tonight. I've been hearing things for weeks. Small things. Phone calls when she thought no one was listening. But 2 days ago, I was cleaning the study. I found a printed email she forgot to shred. She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. It was a confirmation order from a supplier in Belgium. Digoxin. It's a heart medication, but in high doses. It causes cardiac arrest, Du Huan finished, a cold chill settling in his stomach. He knew the drug. It was a favorite tool of hitmen who wanted to leave no trace. She doesn't have a heart condition. No, Vanessa said softly. But according to the medical files Dr. Park has been forging for the last 3 months, you do. Du Huan closed his eyes, the betrayal hitting him harder than a bullet. Dr. Park had been his family physician for a decade. He had trusted the man with his life. The checkups, he muttered. The irregularities he claimed to find during my last physical. He was setting the stage. They needed a paper trail, Vanessa explained, her voice gaining strength as she saw him piecing it together. So when you collapse at the gala, the coroner won't even look for poison. They'll call it a tragedy. A sudden heart failure brought on by stress. And the payout? Du Huan asked, though he already suspected the answer. The catastrophic loss policy you signed last quarter, she said. The one that triggers immediate liquidity of the offshore accounts upon your death. Seoyeon gets the money, 300 million won in cash, plus the assets. Junho gets the territory. They've already divided up your empire, sir. They're just waiting for the toast. Du Huan looked down at his hands. He had built a fortress around his life, guarded by soldiers and steel, yet the enemy had walked right through the front door wearing a wedding ring. The sheer scale of the conspiracy was staggering. It wasn't just a crime of passion, it was a corporate takeover of his existence. He looked at Vanessa. She was trembling, clearly terrified of being caught in the crossfire of a mafia war, yet she stood there, the only loyal soul in a house full of vipers. You saved a dead man walking, Du Huan said, his voice hollow. I saved a man, she corrected him, meeting his gaze. Now you have to decide if you want to stay dead, or if you want to fight back. Du Huan stared at his phone screen, the blue light illuminating the hard lines of his face in the darkened laundry room. He scrolled past names of captains and lieutenants, men who had sworn blood oaths but were now suspect. He stopped at one name, Kong, the man who had taken a bullet for him in Busan. The only one whose loyalty wasn't for sale. He dialed. One ring. Boss. Perimeter check. Guest house. Come alone. Bring the sweep kit. Du Huan hung up before Kong could ask questions. He turned to Vanessa. Stay close. If we run into anyone, you're escorting me to check a maintenance issue. They moved through the shadows of the service hallway, slipping out a side door into the biting winter air. The main house loomed behind them, a glowing palace of lies, while the guest house sat dark and dormant on the edge of the estate, a relic of a time when Du Huan entertained more legitimately. Now, it would be his bunker. Minutes later, a shadow detached itself from the gloom of the pine trees. Mr. Kong, a mountain of a man in a trench coat, materialized with the silence of a ghost. He took in Du Huan's tense posture and the trembling Maid beside him without a flicker of surprise. The house is compromised, Du Huan said, his voice low. Seoyeon. Junho. They're inside. Kang's eyes narrowed, a flash of lethal understanding passing between them. He didn't ask for proof. Du Huan's word was law. He simply nodded and unlocked the guest house door, sweeping the interior with a handheld device to check for bugs before signaling them inside. The interior was cold, the furniture covered in dust sheets. Kong threw them off the heavy oak table in the center of the room and set down a black duffel bag. Out came a laptop, signal jammers, and a suppressed pistol which he placed within easy reach. The main security grid is linked to the master bedroom, Kong rumbled, his voice like gravel. If we access the cameras from here, they might see the login. Then we don't log in, Du Huan said, pacing the room. We bypass it. We set up our own eyes. He looked at Vanessa, who was standing by the drawn curtains, hugging her arms for warmth. She looked out of place among the weaponry and high-tech surveillance gear, yet she was the keystone of the entire operation. Mr. Kong, Du Huan said sharply. This is Vanessa. She is under my personal protection. Anyone who looks at her wrong answers to me. Kong looked at the maid, then bowed his head slightly, a mark of respect he rarely gave civilians. Understood, boss. Du Huan placed his hands on the table, leaning over the blueprints Kong had spread out. The shock was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating focus of a predator. We have 4 days until the gala, he said. Let's get to work. The moment Xiaoyan's pearl-white Porsche disappeared through the iron gates, the timer in Du Huan's head began to tick. They had 2 hours, maybe 3, before she returned from the luxury district in Gangnam. Go, Du Huan signaled. He and Mr. Kong moved like shadows across the manicured lawn and into the main house. It felt perverse to break into his own home, to sneak through the corridors he paid for, but the house no longer felt like his dominion. It was enemy territory. They started in the master suite. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive lavender and the lingering, coppery smell of betrayal. Du Huan stood by the foot of the bed, his jaw tightening as he looked at the silk sheets. He wanted to burn them. Instead, he watched as Kong stood on a chair, deftly unscrewing the casing of the smoke detector above the bed. Wide angle, Kong muttered, his fingers working with surgical precision. Audio and video. Feeds directly to the server in the guest house. He snapped the casing back on. Invisible. They moved to the study next. This was where the business happened, the legitimate contracts and the darker deals Xiaoyan was trying to usurp. Du Huan slid a tiny, high-definition listening device behind the spine of a leather-bound encyclopedia, while Kong planted a camera inside the hollow eye of a decorative dragon bust on the mantel. Done, Kong whispered. We need to. The sound of gravel crunching under tires froze them both. Du Huan moved to the window. The Porsche was back. She forgot something, he hissed. She's early. Downstairs, the front door beeped as the electronic lock disengaged. They were trapped on the 2nd floor. If Xiaoyan walked up the stairs now, the game was over before it began. Vanessa, Du Huan whispered into his earpiece. Intercept. In the foyer, Vanessa's heart hammered against her ribs as the front door swung open. Xiaoyan strode in, looking irritated, her phone pressed to her ear. She headed straight for the staircase. Ma'am. Vanessa blurted out, stepping directly into Xiaoyan's path. Xiaoyan stopped, lowering her phone with a glare that could cut glass. Move, girl. I left my credit card on the dresser. I found this, ma'am, Vanessa stammered, reaching into her apron pocket and pulling out a silver earring she had found under the sofa days ago. It was a desperate gamble. I think you dropped it this morning. I was afraid the vacuum might have. Xiaoyan snatched the earring, her eyes narrowing. You stopped me for this. I wanted to make sure it was safe, Vanessa said, bowing her head submissively to hide the terror in her eyes. Also, the florist is here for the delivery. He needs a signature at the back entrance. Xiaoyan sighed, an impatient, huffing sound. Useless, she muttered, turning on her heel toward the kitchen. I'll deal with it. As her footsteps faded toward the back of the house, Du Huan and Kong slipped silently down the servants' staircase, vanishing into the shadows just as the heavy oak door to the kitchen swung shut. The guest house was silent, save for the low hum of the servers and the crackle of static from the speakers. Du Huan sat motionless in the ergonomic chair, his eyes fixed on the bank of monitors that now broadcast the intimacy of his own bedroom in high definition. It was a perverse form of torture, self-inflicted but necessary. On the center screen, Xiaoyan lounged on the chaise lounge, a glass of his most expensive red wine in her hand. Junho, the man Du Huan had treated like a brother since childhood, paced the room, wearing one of Du Huan's silk robes. The sight alone was enough to make bile rise in Du Huan's throat, but it was the audio that cut deepest. He actually apologized, Xiaoyan said, her voice tinny through the hidden microphone but crystal clear in its cruelty. She swirled the wine, laughing softly. Last week, when he missed dinner because of the port deal, he bought me this diamond bracelet and looked like a kicked puppy. I'll make it up to you, Yobo, he said. Junho chuckled, stopping to trace a finger along her jawline. The Dragon of Soul, he mocked, using the media's nickname for Du Huan. Terrifying to the streets, but blind in his own home. He's pathetic, really. A man who thinks money buys loyalty is a man begging to be sold. He's not a man, Xiaoyan sneered, tossing the bracelet onto the side table as if it were trash. He's a bank account with a pulse. And on Saturday, we finally close the account. Du Huan felt a cracking sensation in his chest, a physical fracturing of his pride. He had built his life on the belief that he was respected, feared, and perhaps, in his own way, loved. Hearing the woman he married dismiss him as nothing more than a foolish mark stripped him naked. His hand curled into a fist on the desk, tight enough that his knuckles turned the color of bone. He started to rise, the urge to storm the main house and silence that laughter overwhelming his strategic mind. Don't. The word was soft but firm. Vanessa stepped into his periphery, blocking the view of the monitors. She didn't look at the screen, she looked only at him, her dark eyes steady and unyielding. Look at me, she commanded, her voice cutting through the red haze of his rage. They want the angry husband. The one who reacts. The one who makes mistakes. Du Huan trembled, the humiliation burning behind his eyes. They are laughing at me. Let them laugh, Vanessa said, reaching out to cover his clenched fist with her hand. Her skin was warm against his cold fury. They're laughing because they think they've won. Let them feel safe. Arrogance is their weakness, Du Huan. Silence is your weapon. She squeezed his hand, a grounding tether to reality. You aren't the man they're describing. Show them who you really are. Du Huan took a ragged breath, the tension slowly bleeding out of his shoulders. He looked at Vanessa, seeing not a maid but a partner. He nodded once, sinking back into the chair, his eyes cold and clear. He turned back to the screen, no longer watching a tragedy, but studying a target. The digital clock on the wall blinked 3 a.m. The guest house was filled with the stale scent of cooled coffee and the low, electric hum of the surveillance servers. Mr. Kong had retreated to check the perimeter, leaving Du Huan and Vanessa alone in the makeshift command center. Du Huan sat across from her at the heavy oak table, watching as she traced the floor plan of the banquet hall with a tired finger. She was exhausted, dark circles forming under her eyes, yet she hadn't complained once. She was dissecting the venue's layout with a focus that rivaled his best lieutenants. Why? He asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Vanessa looked up, blinking. Sir. You could have walked away, Du Huan said, leaning forward, his gaze intense. If you had gone to Xiaoyan and told her I was suspicious, she would have paid you a fortune to keep quiet. Or she would have killed you. Yet here you are, sitting in the dark with a target on your back. Why? Vanessa set down her pen, her expression softening. She didn't look away, nor did she flinch under his scrutiny. I didn't come to Seoul to play games, Du Huan. I came to work. She took a sip of water, her gaze drifting to the window. I was an English teacher when I first arrived. But the pay wasn't enough to send back home. My younger brother. He has tuition, and my mother has medical bills in Chicago that don't stop coming. The agency placed me in your house because the salary was high enough to keep my family afloat. Du Huan studied her. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the fatigue she wore like a heavy coat. He had assumed she was just another transient worker, invisible and interchangeable. He had been wrong. You stayed for them, he stated, not as a question, but as a realization. I stayed because loyalty isn't something you can buy, Vanessa said quietly. You gave me a job. You were cold, yes, but you treated the staff with decency. Xiaoyan. She looks at people and sees disposable things. I couldn't stand by and watch her destroy a life for greed. That's not how I was raised. Du Huan felt a strange tightness in his chest. He had spent years surrounded by men who swore blood oaths but were only loyal to his power. Here was a woman with nothing, fighting for her family across an ocean, who possessed more honor in her uniform than his wife had in her entire silk-draped existence. You are not a servant in this room, Vanessa, Du Huan said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He pushed a fresh cup of coffee toward her, a small offering of peace. You are the only ally I have. For the first time that night, a small, genuine smile touched her lips, warming the cold room. Then let's make sure we win. Sunlight flooded the dining room, bouncing off the crystal stemware and polished mahogany table. To an outsider, it was a scene of domestic perfection, a wealthy couple enjoying a quiet Thursday morning. To Du Huan, it was a battlefield. He sat at the head of the table, his newspaper spread open, though he wasn't reading a word. He was listening to the rhythmic click of Seoyeon's heels as she approached. She leaned down, pressing a kiss to his cheek. Her lips felt like ice, despite the warmth of the room. The scent of her expensive floral perfume, the same scent that had suffocated him in the bedroom video feed, filled his nose, making his stomach turn. "You were late last night," she purred, taking her seat opposite him. She spread a napkin over her lap with practiced elegance. "I waited up, but you never came to bed." "Business," Do-hwan lied smoothly, turning a page. "The port negotiations ran long. I slept in the guest house to avoid waking you." "You work too hard, Yobo," she chided gently, reaching for a slice of melon. "You need to rest before the gala. We can't have you looking exhausted for the cameras." The irony was sharp enough to cut. She was worried about his appearance for the very event where she planned to end his life. Do-hwan gripped the edge of the table beneath the linen cloth, his knuckles whitening. It took every ounce of his discipline not to flip the table and expose her right then and there. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice flat but steady. "I feel stronger than ever." The double doors swung open. Vanessa entered, carrying a silver carafe on a tray. She moved with a quiet, efficient grace, her face a mask of professional detachment. She moved to Seoyeon first, pouring the steaming dark roast without a tremor in her hand, then circled the table to Do-hwan. As she leaned in to fill his cup, the scent of fresh linen and soap cut through Seoyeon's cloying perfume. It was a clean, honest smell. Do-hwan looked up, catching her gaze as the coffee poured. For a fraction of a second, the world narrowed down to the two of them. In that brief exchange, volumes were spoken. "She believes the lie," Vanessa's dark eyes seemed to say. "Hold the line," Do-hwan's steel gaze replied. It was a secret language, forged in the darkness of the laundry room and solidified in the light of day. "Black, sir?" Vanessa asked softly, breaking the spell. "Yes," Do-hwan replied, watching the dark liquid swirl in the porcelain. "Thank you, Vanessa." She retreated to the sideboard, standing silent and watchful like a sentinel. Do-hwan lifted the cup to his lips. The coffee was bitter, hot, and grounding. He looked across the table at his wife, who was smiling at her phone, likely texting the man she intended to replace him with. Do-hwan took a sip. Let them smile. Let them think he was the blind, tired husband. The man sitting at the head of the table was no longer a victim. He was a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The air in the study was thick enough to choke on. Do-hwan sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing shipping manifests he had already memorized, while Junho paced the room like a caged tiger. His cousin, the man who was currently sleeping with his wife and plotting his murder, wore a suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're distracted, brother," Junho said, pausing to inspect a framed photo on the bookshelf. "The gala is in 2 days. You need to be sharp." "I'm always sharp," Do-hwan replied without looking up, fighting the urge to reach for the pistol mounted beneath the desk. "Just ensuring the assets are liquid. We need capital for the expansion." "Of course. Liquidity is key." Junho chuckled darkly, a double entendre that made Do-hwan's skin crawl. Junho wandered toward the fireplace, his gaze drifting to the ornate jade and gold dragon bust on the mantel, the very object housing the microcamera Mr. Kong had installed. Do-hwan's heart hammered against his ribs. The lens was hidden in the dragon's eye, invisible from a distance, but up close. Junho leaned in, squinting. "I never noticed this before," he murmured, reaching out. "The eye. It catches the light differently." Do-hwan froze. If Junho touched it, if he felt the heat of the battery or saw the lens, it was over. They would find the transmitter, then the guest house, and then the bodies would pile up. Do-hwan started to rise, his mind racing for an excuse to stop him, but Junho's fingers were inches away. Suddenly, the double doors burst open. Vanessa entered, balancing a heavy silver tray laden with crystal decanters and ice. "Refreshments, sirs," she announced, her voice slightly louder than necessary. Junho glanced back, annoyed, but didn't step away from the mantel. "Put it down and leave." He turned back to the dragon, his finger brushing the cold jade. Du Huan, come look at this. It looks like a defect in the... Crash. The room exploded with the sound of shattering glass. Vanessa had tripped on the edge of the Persian rug, sending the heavy tray flying. Ice, amber whiskey, and jagged shards of crystal sprayed across the floor, splashing onto Junho's immaculate Italian leather shoes. You stupid girl. Junho roared, jumping back and forgetting the dragon entirely. He looked down at his soaked trousers in disbelief. Look what you did. Vanessa was already on her knees, head bowed low, trembling with a performance that was terrifyingly convincing. I am so sorry, sir. I tripped, please forgive me. Du Huan exhaled, the breath shuddering out of him. He stood up, masking his relief with a scowl. Get out, he barked at her, playing his part. Clean this mess up immediately before I fire you. Vanessa nodded frantically, gathering the shards with bare hands, ignoring the small cuts. She dared a single glance upward through her lashes. Her eyes met Du Huan's for a split second, a silent message of adrenaline and reassurance. I got him. Junho dusted off his pants, sneering at the maid. Hard to find good help these days, isn't it, cousin? He muttered, turning away from the mantel, the dragon's secret safe once more. Impossible, Du Huan agreed, watching the only person in the room he could trust. Absolutely impossible. The mid-morning sun did nothing to warm the chill in the guest house. Mr. Kong stood by the workbench, gloved hands moving with the precision of a surgeon over a small, unassuming cardboard box. It had arrived 10 minutes ago via a private courier, marked as herbal supplements, from a holistic clinic in Gangnam, the same clinic Dr. Park used to falsify Du Huan's medical records. Is that it? Du Huan asked, standing a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. Vanessa stood beside him, her hands clasped tight in front of her apron, her face pale. Kong didn't answer immediately. He carefully sliced the tape, revealing a sleek, safety-sealed bottle. With a syringe, he extracted a microscopic amount of the clear liquid inside and dropped it onto a reactive test strip. The strip turned a violent shade of crimson instantly. Digoxin concentrate, Kong murmured, his voice grim. Enough in this bottle to stop the hearts of 10 men. Confirmed. Vanessa let out a small, shuddering breath. She really ordered it to the front door. Arrogance, Du Huan said, his eyes fixed on the small glass vial. She thinks she's untouchable. She believes I'm already a ghost. Kong moved quickly. He placed the lethal vial into a forensic evidence bag, sealing it tight. Then, he took an identical vial from his kit, filled with a harmless saline solution mixed with a mild bittering agent to mimic the medicinal taste, and placed it into the original packaging. He resealed the box with a specialized adhesive that left no trace of tampering. The courier is still at the gate, distracted by the security team, Kong reported, handing the evidence bag to Du Huan. I'll run the package up to the main house myself. I'll tell the kitchen staff I picked it up on my rounds so it doesn't look suspicious. Du Huan held the bag. The liquid inside looked like water, innocent and clear. It was heavy in his hand, the weight of his own murder. He looked at Vanessa. She was staring at the poison, the reality of the plot no longer abstract but terrifyingly physical. This is the nail in their coffin, Du Huan said quietly. If we switch this, she proceeds with the plan. She hands me the glass at the gala, thinking she's won. And if she tests it? Vanessa asked, her voice trembling slightly. She won't, Du Huan replied, his gaze darkening. She's too confident. She doesn't want to risk handling it more than necessary. She'll pour, she'll smile, and she'll wait for me to drop. He handed the evidence back to Kong. Secure this in the safe. Then get that box to the kitchen. Make sure Sioyan gets her delivery. Kong nodded and vanished out the door with the decoy box. Du Huan turned to Vanessa, the tension in the room palpable. We have the weapon, he said, his voice softer now. Now we just need the confession. Vanessa looked up at him, fear replaced by a steely resolve. Then let's get ready for the party. The garment bag hanging from the back of the guest house door looked like a shroud in the dim light, but the logo stamped in gold leaf whispered of Paris and astronomical price tags. Du Huan stood by the window, watching the snow begin to fall again, turning the estate into a deceptive winter wonderland. "Put it on," he said, not turning around. Vanessa, who had been recalibrating the audio receivers at the table, looked up. She wiped her hands on her jeans, eyeing the bag with suspicion. "Sir, you aren't wearing a uniform tomorrow night," Du Huan stated, his voice brooking no argument. "The uniform makes you invisible to the guests, but it makes you a target to Sioyan. If you are in the kitchen, she can isolate you. She can order you away." He turned then, his face grim. "I need you on the floor, where I can see you." "I'm the maid, Du Huan," Vanessa said, a nervous laugh escaping her. "I can't just walk into the Lunar New Year gala and mingle with Seoul's elite. They'll know." "They will know what I tell them," he cut in, stepping closer. "Tomorrow, you are not domestic staff. You are my personal executive assistant, acting as event oversight. It gives you the authority to move freely, to stand by my side, and to reject any order Sioyan tries to give you." He gestured to the bag. "Open it." Vanessa hesitated, then reached for the zipper. The sound was loud in the quiet room. As the plastic parted, heavy midnight blue silk spilled out like ink. It was a floor-length gown, structured and elegant, designed to command respect rather than just attention. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. "It has a reinforced pocket sewn into the sash," Du Huan explained, his tone strictly tactical, though his eyes traced the line of her jaw. "For the signal jammer and the backup drive. The fabric is thick enough to conceal the wire for your earpiece." Vanessa touched the cold silk, her fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't a gift, it was camouflage. It was armor. Yet, the intimacy of the gesture, him choosing this for her, stripping away the apron that defined her existence in this house, hung heavy in the air. "It's too much," she whispered. "It's necessary," Du Huan said softly. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers before pulling back. "I cannot watch Sioyan and watch my own back at the same time. I need you close, Vanessa. Closer than a maid is allowed to be." She looked up at him, the weight of the silk in her hands matching the weight of the trust he was placing in her. "I won't leave your side," she promised. "Good," Du Huan replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Because when the music starts, we are the only two people in that room who know the song is ending." The silence in the guest house was heavier than the snow piling up outside. The monitors were finally dark, the strategy finalized, the weapons checked and rechecked. Tomorrow, the violence would be public. Tonight, the quiet was personal. Du Huan stood by the frosted window, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. He hadn't taken a sip in 20 minutes. He was watching his reflection in the glass. A man who had built an empire on fear, now relying on the mercy of a woman he had barely acknowledged a week ago. "You should sleep," Vanessa said softly from the sofa. She was hugging a cushion, the fatigue of the last few days etching shadows under her eyes, but she hadn't left the room. She wouldn't leave him. Du Huan turned, the ice clinking in his glass. "I can't. If I close my eyes, I see her pouring that drink." He walked over to the table, setting the glass down with a heavy thud. He looked at Vanessa, really looked at her. In the dim light, stripped of the uniform and the pretenses of their stations, she was the only real thing in his world. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice rough. "And I need the truth, Vanessa." She sat up straighter, sensing the shift in the air. "Anything." "I am not a good man," Du Huan stated, the confession bitter on his tongue. "I have ruined lives. I have ordered violence. I built this house with dirty money. Most people would say getting poisoned by my own wife is justice. Karma." He leaned against the edge of the table, crossing his arms to keep them from shaking. "So why? Not for the money. Not for your family. Why save me? Why step between a monster and his fate?" Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell him he was a good person deep down. She stood up and walked over to him, stopping just inches away. The space between them crackled with an unspoken energy, a magnetic pull that terrified and grounded him all at once. "Because monsters are made, Du Huan," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "But betrayal, that destroys the soul before the body even dies." She reached out, her fingers hovering near his hand on the table before she boldly covered it with her own. Her skin was warm, a lifeline in the cold room. "I didn't save a boss or a criminal," she said, her voice fierce and unwavering. "I saved a human being who was about to be murdered by the person he trusted most in the world. I don't care what you've done. No one, not even you, deserves to die betrayed." Du-hwan felt the breath leave his lungs. For the first time in years, the wall around his heart developed a hairline fracture. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers, holding on as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling off the edge of the earth. "Thank you," he breathed. "Save the thanks," she replied, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Just survive tomorrow." The grand hall of the estate had been transformed into a gilded cage. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the shoulders of Seoul's elite. Politicians, CEOs, and syndicate leaders who had washed their blood money clean in real estate. The air hummed with the polite murmur of gossip and the clinking of champagne flutes, a symphony of excess that masked the rot beneath the floorboards. Du-hwan stood at the center of it all, a statue in a bespoke tuxedo. His arm felt heavy, weighed down by the slender, manicured hand of his wife. Seo-yeon was radiant in crimson silk, a color that screamed power and passion, though Du-hwan knew it was the color of blood. She played her role with terrifying perfection, leaning into him, laughing at the dull jokes of a senator, and occasionally brushing invisible lint from his lapel with the tenderness of a woman in love. "You're tense, Yobo," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear. To the room, it looked like an intimate secret. To Du-hwan, it sounded like a taunt. "Relax. Tonight is a celebration." "I am relaxed," Du-hwan lied, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Just admiring the turnout. You outdid yourself." "I did it for us," Seo-yeon beamed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. It was a masterclass in deception. If he hadn't seen the video feeds, if he hadn't held the vial of poison in his own hand, he would have believed her. She was guiding him toward his grave with a smile that could light up the city. Across the room, the crowd parted slightly. The shift in atmosphere was subtle at first, a ripple of curiosity that silenced the nearest conversations. Du-hwan followed their gaze and felt his breath hitch. Vanessa stood near the orchestra, a vision in midnight blue. The gown he had chosen fit her like a second skin, the dark silk cascading to the floor, shimmering under the lights. She wore no jewelry, no diamonds to compete with the garish displays around her, yet she commanded the space with a quiet, regal dignity. She wasn't the maid anymore. She was the anomaly, the beautiful, dangerous variable that Seo-yeon hadn't accounted for. Seo-yeon stiffened beside him, her nails digging slightly into his sleeve. "Who is that?" she hissed, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Is that the help?" "That is my executive assistant for the evening," Du-hwan said, covering Seo-yeon's hand with his own, trapping her fingers against his arm. "I needed someone to ensure the security protocols were followed. Since she knows the house better than anyone, I asked her to step in." Seo-yeon's eyes narrowed, scanning Vanessa from head to toe. She sensed the threat, not of violence, but of presence. Vanessa met her stare across the ballroom, not with submission, but with a cool, impenetrable gaze. "She looks out of place," Seo-yeon muttered, forcing her smile back into place as a photographer approached. "On the contrary," Du-hwan replied, turning to face the flashing camera, his heart pounding a war drum against his ribs. "I think she's the only honest thing in this room." The heavy double doors of the kitchen swung shut, instantly muffling the swelling crescendo of the orchestra and the murmur of the crowd. The space was a gleaming cathedral of stainless steel and steam, filled with the chaotic choreography of caterers plating courses. Seo-yeon swept in, her crimson dress a violent slash of color against the sterile white tiles. She didn't look at the staff, she simply raised a hand, her diamond bracelet catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Leave us," she commanded, her voice cutting through the clatter of pans. "I will prepare the ceremonial toast myself. It must be perfect." The head chef hesitated, then bowed low, signaling his team to retreat into the pantry and prep areas. Within seconds, the main island was abandoned. From the shadows near the service entrance, Vanessa watched. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her waist, angling her body so that the third pearl button on her sash, the one housing a high-definition microlens, was pointed directly at the center island. Seoyeon approached the antique lacquer tray set out for the occasion. On it sat 2 gold cups, heirlooms of the syndicate, and a crystal decanter of Sujeongwa, the traditional cinnamon punch Du Hwan favored. Her movements were ritualistic, almost reverent, as if she were a priestess at an altar rather than an executioner. She poured the dark, aromatic liquid into both cups. Then, with a quick, furtive glance at the swinging doors, she reached into her clutch. Vanessa held her breath. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to shake the camera, but she forced her body to turn to stone. Got you, she thought. Seoyeon pulled out the small glass vial, the one Mr. Kong had carefully resealed with saline solution just hours before. To Seoyeon, it was the end of her husband and the beginning of her reign. She uncorked it with a flick of her thumb and tipped the contents into the cup on the right. Every drop fell with agonizing slowness. She swirled the cup gently, watching the liquid merge, then tucked the empty vial back into her purse. A small, satisfied smile played on her lips, a look of pure, unadulterated malice. "Ma'am." Seoyeon jumped, spinning around. Vanessa stepped out of the periphery, her expression the picture of innocent servitude. "The orchestra is asking for the cue. Shall I signal them?" Seoyeon's eyes narrowed, scanning Vanessa's face for any sign of witnessing the act. Finding only professional deference, she relaxed, though her sneer returned. "Tell them to wait. I am bringing the chairman his drink now." She picked up the tray, the gold cups clinking softly. "Make yourself scarce, girl. The family is about to make history." "Yes, ma'am," Vanessa whispered, watching Seoyeon strut toward the ballroom doors. She touched the pearl button on her sash, feeling the warmth of the recording device. "History," she repeated to the empty room. "Just not the kind you think." The heavy oak doors to the ballroom groaned open, and the chatter of 200 guests died away like a candle snuffed out. It wasn't a commanded silence, but a magnetic one, drawn by the woman in crimson gliding across the parquet floor. Seoyeon moved with the grace of a queen and the focus of an assassin. The gold lacquer tray in her hands was steady, bearing the 2 ceremonial cups that would seal her victory. She didn't look at the crowd, her eyes were locked on Du Hwan, shining with a terrifying mixture of adoration and anticipation. At a subtle gesture from the conductor, the orchestra's waltz halted mid-measure. The sudden quiet was heavy, pressurized by the collective gaze of Seoul's underworld elite. They watched, captivated by the spectacle of the ruthless dragon of Seoul being served by his devoted wife. Du Hwan stood at the center of the room, his tuxedo stark against the riot of colors around him. He watched her approach, his face a mask of calm. Inside, however, his heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He wasn't afraid of dying. He knew the liquid was harmless saline, but the sheer audacity of the moment made his blood run cold. She was walking toward him in front of his friends, his enemies, and his business partners, intending to kill him in plain sight. "My love," Seoyeon said as she reached him, her voice pitched perfectly to carry through the silent hall. She lifted the cup on the right, the one she had laced with what she believed was cardiac arrest-inducing digoxin. "For you." She offered it with both hands, a traditional gesture of supreme respect. Du Hwan looked down at the dark, cinnamon-scented liquid. It swirled gently, catching the light of the chandeliers. To anyone else, it was a festive punch. To him, it was a loaded gun pointed directly at his chest. He reached out. His fingers brushed hers as he took the cup. Her skin was damp, a betraying sign of nerves she masked with a dazzling smile. "For the new year," she whispered, her eyes searching his, waiting for him to drink, to stumble, to fall so she could play the grieving widow. "And for our future." Du Hwan held the cold gold metal. He felt the weight of the lie she had handed him. From the periphery of his vision, he saw Vanessa standing near the orchestra pit, her hand clutching the silk of her gown, her body tense as a bowstring. She gave him a microscopic nod. "We have it." Du Hwan raised the cup, not to his lips, but to eye level. The room held its breath, waiting for the toast that would end the night. "To the future," Du Hwan echoed, his voice devoid of warmth. "And everything it reveals." The gold cup felt heavy, cold against his fingertips, but it was the weight of the moment that pressed down on the room. Seoyeon's smile was fixed, a porcelain mask of devotion, her eyes urging him to tilt his head back and swallow. She was watching for the movement of his throat, the single action that would signal her freedom and his end. Du Huan brought the rim to his lips. He inhaled the scent of cinnamon and dried persimmon, sweet, spicy, and if Xiaoyan had her way, lethal. He paused. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a collective holding of breath from Seoul's most powerful figures. Slowly, deliberately, Du Huan lowered the cup just an inch. He looked over the rim, locking eyes with his wife. The warmth in his gaze had vanished, replaced by a glacial, terrifying clarity. "You speak of the future, Xiaoyan," Du Huan said, his voice low but carrying to the back of the hall without a microphone. "But a future built on lies is just a grave waiting to be filled." Xiaoyan's smile faltered. Her brow furrowed in a microscopic display of confusion. "Yobo," she whispered, the endearment sounding like a question. "The toast. Everyone is waiting." "Yes, the toast." Du Huan turned away from her, addressing the hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. He held the cup aloft, not as a celebration, but as an exhibit. "Usually, we drink to prosperity, to health, to long life." He took a step back, widening the distance between himself and his wife. "But tonight, I find myself in the mood for something purer." He turned his back on the crowd, facing the massive LED screen that dominated the stage, the screen intended to display charity milestones and flattering portraits of the couple. "A toast," Du Huan thundered, his voice suddenly sharp as a blade, cutting through the confusion. "To the truth." He raised his free hand and snapped his fingers. At the edge of the room, Vanessa pressed the remote concealed in the pocket of her gown. The screen flickered to life, blindingly bright in the dim hall. It didn't show a montage of their marriage. It showed the time-stamped footage from the master bedroom, grainy but unmistakable. The sound of Xiaoyan's breath hitching was audible even over the sudden gasp of the crowd. Du Huan didn't drink. He simply stood there, the golden cup still raised, as the monster on the screen began to speak. The giant LED screen behind Du Huan flickered, replacing the charity logo with the grainy, high-contrast footage from the master bedroom. The audio boomed through the concert-grade speakers, distorting slightly but unmistakable in its clarity. Xiaoyan's voice filled the hall, cold and calculating. "Digoxin. It mimics a heart attack. By the time the ambulance arrives, I'll be a rich widow." Then came Junho's laughter, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "To the widow Kim. And to the empire we're taking from his corpse." The ballroom didn't just gasp, it recoiled. Hundreds of eyes darted from the screen to the woman standing in the center of the floor in her crimson dress. The mask of the loving wife didn't just slip, it shattered. Xiaoyan staggered back, her face draining of color, the golden cup in her hand tilting dangerously. Du Huan didn't look at the screen. He kept his eyes locked on hers, watching the terror take root. "You wanted a heart attack, Xiaoyan," he said, his voice cutting through the rising murmur like a whip. "But I think you'll find my heart is still beating." He pointed a finger at the cup in her trembling hand. "Test the drink. You'll find the rest of the vial you ordered." Junho, realizing the game was up, shoved a waiter aside, bolting for the terrace doors. He didn't make it 3 steps. Mr. Kong materialized from the crowd, tackling him to the parquet floor with a bone-crunching thud that silenced the room. Simultaneously, the main double doors burst open. A squad of uniformed police officers, led by a detective Du Huan had briefed days ago, swarmed the floor. They moved with precision, parting the sea of stunned elites. Xiaoyan screamed, a raw, feral sound that had nothing to do with grace. "It's a lie. It's a deepfake," she shrieked, thrashing as an officer twisted her arms behind her back. "I am his wife. I own this house." The cold steel of handcuffs bit into her wrists, cutting off her protests. The golden cup fell from her hand, clattering loudly against the marble and spilling the poisoned cinnamon punch across the floor like dark blood. "You own nothing," Du Huan said quietly, turning his back on her as they dragged her away. Her heels scraped uselessly against the floor, her screams echoing until the doors slammed shut, leaving a heavy, stunned silence in her wake. Du Huan exhaled, the tension of the last 4 days finally leaving his body. He looked past the shocked faces of his associates, past the spilled poison, to the edge of the room. Vanessa stood in the shadows near the orchestra, her hand still clutching the remote in her pocket. She offered him a small, weary nod. The war was over. The winter snow had finally melted, replaced by the soft, drifting pink of cherry blossoms that carpeted the estate grounds. The air no longer bit with frost, it smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. Du Huan stood on the terrace, watching the woman in the garden below. For the first time in his life, the silence of the house didn't feel like loneliness, it felt like peace. Over the last 90 days, he had dismantled the empire his father had built and Sioyan had tried to steal. The casinos were sold, the smuggling routes severed, the dirty money washed clean through charities and legitimate tech investments. The Dragon of Soul was retired. He walked down the stone steps, the gravel crunching softly under his loafers. Vanessa was kneeling by the azaleas, her hands deep in the soil. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a simple sundress, her hair tied back loosely. "You missed a spot," Du Huan said, stopping a few feet away. Vanessa looked up, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek with the back of her hand. She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that made his chest ache. "I'm not on the payroll anymore, remember? This is volunteer work." "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," Du Huan said, his tone shifting. He reached out, offering a hand to help her up. She took it, dusting off her knees. "Don't tell me you need help with the new merger. I saw the news. You sold the logistics arm yesterday." "I did," Du Huan nodded. "I'm done with all of it. The shadows, the guards, the fear. I'm just a man now, Vanessa. A man with a very large, very empty house." He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that no longer felt like a threat, but a promise. "I don't need a maid anymore. I don't need a bodyguard. And I certainly don't need a staff overseer." Vanessa's smile faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering in her dark eyes. "Then, what do you need?" Du Huan reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a contract or a severance check. He produced a small velvet box. "I need a partner," he whispered, opening the lid. Inside sat a ring. Not a gaudy diamond meant to show off wealth, but a simple, flawless band of platinum. "I need the woman who saw the good in me when I couldn't see it myself. I need you to stay, not because you have to, but because this is your home." Vanessa stared at the ring, her breath catching in her throat. Tears pricked her eyes, shimmering in the spring sunlight. "Du Huan." "No more lies," he vowed, taking her hand and pressing the ring into her palm. "Just truth. And us." "Yes," she breathed, closing her fingers around the metal. "Yes." Du Huan pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair as the cherry blossoms fell around them like confetti, signaling the end of the long winter and the start of their life in the sun. True loyalty cannot be bought with gold, and true love is found not in those who share your spotlight, but in those who are willing to sit with you in the dark. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe for more heart-pounding stories. See you in the next chapter.